Target locked. Engaging in 3, 2, 1. The voice was calm, calculated, emanating from the tactical station as the massive battleship Vanguard surged forward, its sleek hull cutting through the cold, star-speckled void. The engines roared beneath their feet, pushing the ship deeper into enemy territory. Ambassador Lucian Draven stood at the Strategic Operations Center, his fingers resting lightly on the display interface, watching the movements of the Galactic Council's warships as they drifted on the holoscreens. The air was thick with anticipation, the atmosphere inside the command deck heavy with tension. The Vanguard's bridge was a darkened chamber of metal and glass, lit only by the sharp blue of laser plasma displays and the faint red glow of warning beacons. Outside, the glittering silence of space was broken only by the tactical hum of the ship's movement, a reminder of the deadly seriousness of their mission. "This is it. They've taken the bait," Lucian murmured under his breath, barely moving, his eyes locked on the displays. He could almost feel the heat rising from the tactical officers' stations, the energy vibrating in the air, a promise of the imminent violence to come. Director Varian Ordos, stationed to his right, leaned forward, eyes sharp and unblinking as he scrutinized the data. "They've fallen for it. The bounty hunters are already converging. We've given them just enough to provoke them into action." Lucian's jaw tightened as he observed the screen, his mind racing. Across the galaxy, mercenary fleets and bounty hunters were now tracking Earth's location, each one seeking the promised rewards for capturing a human, an outlaw species. The bounty had been declared by the Galactic Council, and they were eager to test humanity's strength by throwing everything they had at Earth. The Council believed it would weaken Earth's growing influence, decimating humanity in a relentless hunt. They were wrong. Lucian's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. He knew exactly how to turn the tables. "All hunters are now engaged. Should we proceed?" Varian's voice brought him back to the moment, the urgency in it masking a deep sense of anticipation. Lucian didn't respond immediately, but his thoughts were sharp, dissecting every angle of this plan. "Proceed, but make sure we're feeding them the wrong data. False targets, fabricated logs, misdirections, let them tear each other apart." The room seemed to grow colder as Varian gave a quick nod, initiating the cascade of digital chaos that would soon reverberate across the galaxy. The Vanguard lurched as its weapon systems powered up. A subtle, almost imperceptible vibration surged through the deck, enough to catch Lucian's attention as he turned toward the crew. His gaze swept over the officers stationed at their consoles, each one calm, focused, ready. Their faces were lit by the flickering screens in front of them, casting a dull light across their expressions, taut with controlled tension. One of the younger officers, Lieutenant Core, glanced up from his station, his voice slightly unsteady. "Sir, we're reading multiple pirate fleets on intercept trajectories. They'll be here within hours." Lucian's eyes narrowed. The pirates, the mercenaries, the bounty hunters, they were all pawns in a grand game, and the pieces were already moving. The Council's bounty on humanity wasn't just a threat, it was an opportunity. He could feel it, deep in his bones. He wasn't just playing for survival anymore. He was playing to reshape the galaxy. "I know. Let them come," Lucian replied coolly, his tone unwavering as his eyes fixed on the sprawling galaxy on the display. "When they come, they will find nothing but confusion and mistrust." Varian stepped closer, his face reflecting a mix of concern and admiration for the plan taking shape. "It's risky, Lucian. If they begin to realize we're feeding them false intel—" "They won't," Lucian interrupted, his voice confident, almost too calm. He turned towards the director, his gaze steady. "We've been feeding them misinformation for months now. Every major faction will believe the others are targeting humanity for their own gain. Greed will blind them, and fear will make them reckless. Once the first mercenary ships start falling, the rest will scatter like rats." The control room was silent for a heartbeat as the weight of Lucian's words sank in. Outside the ship, the stars blinked relentlessly, indifferent to the drama unfolding below them. But within the Vanguard, there was a pulse of energy, a burning drive to outsmart, to manipulate, to play the long game. We'll have to be quick, Varian said, watching the display screen shift as multiple fleets began to converge on Earth's coordinates. The digital map glowed bright red as enemy ships appeared one by one. Quick isn't necessary, Lucian replied. We don't need speed. We need them to doubt their own calculations, make them question their own intelligence, make them distrust their allies, and they will turn on each other. The countdown was nearly complete, and Lucian turned to his communications officer, a steely young man named Jorik, who was monitoring the incoming pirate transmission. Send them the new coordinates. Make sure to tweak the system so it looks like the hunters are closing in on a high-priority target. We want them to get hungry. Let them believe that humanity is vulnerable. The officer's fingers flew across his console. Coordinates updated, sir. They're taking the bait. Lucian's eyes flicked back to the digital map. His face remained impassive, though inside, his pulse quickened. The first waves of confusion were already starting. As the pirate fleets drew closer, the numbers swelled. Lucian had anticipated this moment for weeks. A quiet war of misinformation. He'd outwitted entire factions before. This was no different. He paced slowly around the room, his hands clasped behind his back, every movement deliberate. Soon they'll be so focused on the rewards they'll forget what they're really hunting. They'll forget that they're not dealing with some weak, isolated species. They'll forget that we planned for this. One of the tactical officers turned, his voice tinged with skepticism. But what if they don't fall for it? What if they see through the web we're spinning? Lucian stopped, eyes narrowing slightly, calculating. His gaze met the officer's, unwavering and intense. They will. But not yet. Not until it's too late. A low hum vibrated beneath their feet as the Vanguard adjusted its position, preparing to engage the enemy if necessary. The crew members worked with surgical precision, their movements swift and sharp. And Lucian? He stood there, a master of the game, feeling the weight of the entire galaxy in his hands. In that moment, the enemy wasn't just outside. It was within the very strategy they were crafting. And Lucian knew something the Council didn't. Humanity wasn't just going to survive. They were going to thrive. As the countdown clock ticked closer, the words, "Target locked," echoed through the room again, and Lucian couldn't help but feel the thrill of the coming storm. The battle was just beginning, but Earth was already winning. "Let's see if they can keep up with us," Lucian said under his breath, a glimmer of a smile crossing his lips. He turned back to the display, watching as enemy fleets scattered and collided. Lucian Draven stood motionless at the command deck, the light from the laser plasma displays casting sharp shadows over his features. Outside the reinforced glass of the bridge, the stars blinked like distant promises, indifferent to the conflict unfolding in their midst. His fingers traced the edges of the holographic interface before him, manipulating a web of digital misinformation designed to sow chaos. Every new mission log sent, every subtle shift in the coordinates, was another step in a plan that had been brewing for months. The crew of the Vanguard worked around him, focused on their own tasks. But Lucian's mind was in another place entirely, calculating, anticipating, waiting for the inevitable collapse. The first signs of success were subtle. Pirate ships that had been sent on the wrong trail now began to change course, drawn by false intel. The hunters were eager, hungry for the promised reward, but the first few clashes were nothing more than whispers in the void. Still, the stakes were high. Lucian knew that this was just the beginning. In a few hours, the situation would spiral, and they needed to be ready. "Have we confirmed the intercept?" Lucian asked, his voice low but commanding. Director Varian Ordos, standing by the tactical station, didn't even need to glance at the display. "Yes. They're already questioning each other. First pirate fleet's on the move. Mercenaries have started arguing over bounties. They're not used to this. They'll tear each other apart soon enough." Lucian nodded slowly, the corner of his mouth twitching in approval. "Perfect. Keep feeding them. Keep their eyes on the wrong targets. Make them chase shadows." The air around them seemed to crackle with the energy of a plan coming to life. The silence in the room felt like the calm before a storm. The buzz of the laser plasma displays the only sound that cut through the tension. On the far side of the bridge, Lieutenant Kor looked up from his console, his brow furrowed. Sir, we've got unexpected movement from the mercenary guilds. They're communicating with each other, but it's uncoordinated. They're fighting over routes, arguing about who gets the prize. Lucian's eyes glinted with the cold satisfaction of a well-laid plan beginning to show results. Exactly as expected. Divide and conquer. That's all it takes. They're too eager to outsmart each other. Varian shifted, a thin smile forming on his lips. I'm starting to think you knew they'd react this way from the start. Lucian didn't respond immediately. His gaze stayed locked on the shifting patterns on the heads-up display. The bounty hunters were desperate. Too desperate. They wanted Earth, but they weren't prepared for what Lucian had prepared for them. The mercenaries and pirates who had once been so confident now faced confusion, mistrust, and the uncertainty of their own intelligence. One faction would get the wrong data. Another would question its legitimacy, turning on the first. And with every misstep, the web would tighten. As the crews of the various mercenary factions began fighting among themselves, Lucian's hand hovered over the console, initiating the next step. Send out the new coordinates. Have them lock onto a system. Let them believe they're close to catching the target. The atmosphere in the room grew even heavier as the fleet slowly adjusted its course, feeding more false data to the growing chaos. Every pirate fleet, every bounty hunter guild was now unknowingly working in opposition. Some would believe they were closer to Earth than they really were. Others would chase empty leads, wasting precious resources on false hopes. Lucian's mind raced ahead, tracking each move, calculating the next phase. The plan was unfolding, but it wasn't flawless. He could feel the small tremors of doubt in the air, ripples of uncertainty in the form of whispers from the command deck. Some of the junior officers were starting to question the efficacy of this elaborate charade. They had seen the bounty hunters closing in, their ships on the move, their weapons ready. The air was thick with the promise of violence, but Lucian was calm. You're not nervous, are you? Varian's voice cut through the tension, a note of amusement in it. He could always read Lucian's mood, and in the midst of this calculated chaos, his partner was as unruffled as ever. Lucian's eyes flicked over to him, a small, knowing smile curling at the corners of his lips. Nervous? Hardly. This is just the beginning. We've set the pieces in motion. Now we watch them destroy each other. One of the younger officers, Lieutenant Zoran, glanced up, his voice wavering slightly. But what if they catch on before the conflict escalates? The pirates might find the inconsistencies. They won't. Lucian cut him off, his tone sharpening. Greed has clouded their minds. The more they fight, the more they'll trust their own lies. They'll convince themselves that the bounty is just a few steps away. The quiet whir of the ship's systems, the pulse of their navigation engines, filled the space. As the Vanguard cruised silently through the black void, a strange tranquility surrounded the crew, even as the storm of chaos brewed beyond their control. The feeling was surreal, almost as if they were waiting for a storm to break, but one that they knew they could control. Lucian turned back to the display, eyes narrowing as he adjusted the parameters for the next round of misinformation. The laser plasma lights flickered as the new targets were activated, sending waves of disinformation to the bounty hunters. The trap was set. Now they would fall into it. Adjust the timeline. Make it look like the target is moving faster. That'll get them to waste more time, Lucian murmured, his mind already calculating the consequences of each move. Understood, sir, Varian said, his fingers flying across the console. Lucian leaned back slightly in his chair, watching as the map on the display shifted again. Pirate fleets that had once been in close pursuit now veered off course, convinced that they had missed the real target. Smaller mercenary factions, too disorganized to cooperate, now scrambled to cover ground they'd already lost. They were being drawn further away from their goal, each minute weakening the integrity of their mission. The air in the room was still thick, but the tension had changed. It was no longer the nervous anticipation of something uncertain. Now it was the deliberate calm of a master chess player watching his opponents slowly, inevitably, position themselves for defeat. A sharp voice broke through the silence. Incoming message from the Vengeance, Lieutenant Kor reported. his eyes focused intently on his screen. "They've confirmed that their fleet has engaged another faction. They're about to hit a dead end. They think they're getting close to the target, but they're— Send them more misleading data," Lucian interrupted smoothly, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Let them follow their path for a while longer. They won't question anything until they've already wasted too much time." Varian's voice was tinged with awe. "You've thought of everything." Lucian nodded, his mind already focused on the next step. This was just the start of a much bigger play, but it was working, faster than he'd anticipated. The first stage of the chaos was complete. The hunters had begun to turn on each other, and humanity's position had only grown stronger. They were playing the long game, and as the pirates and mercenaries fought amongst themselves, Earth had already taken its first victory. A soft laugh escaped Lucian's lips, and for the briefest of moments, his steely composure cracked. "I haven't even begun to show them what we can do." The Vanguard sailed through the blackness of space like a shadow, silent and unyielding. Lucian Draven stood at the helm of the command center, staring at the sprawling grid of laser plasma displays that painted the vastness of their mission across the darkened walls. His fingers moved with practiced precision over the control panel, sending more waves of false data to the mercenary fleets scattered across the galaxy. They were close now, too close, and Lucian's plan had entered its most volatile phase. A beeping tone broke the silence, and Lucian's attention snapped to the screen. It was a transmission from one of the pirate factions, the Scorned Blade, notorious for their ruthlessness and ferocity. Their lead ship, the Black Widow, had just entered a newly calculated intercept zone. The crew had already swallowed the bait, but Lucian knew better than to get complacent. "Initiate the next step," Lucian ordered, his voice calm but edged with urgency. Director Varian Ordos, standing just to his left, nodded and began inputting the new orders into the system. The pirate fleet was already in motion, their course set by Lucian's carefully orchestrated deception. They believed they were moments away from capturing the human target, when in reality, they were being led into a trap. A trap that, if executed correctly, would sow the first seeds of chaos. "Coordinates locked, sir," Varian confirmed, his eyes scanning the console. "They're taking the bait." A brief silence lingered before Lieutenant Corr's voice rang out from across the room. "Sir, multiple incoming communications from other factions. They're reporting they found the same target, and they're fighting over it." Lucian's lips curled into a subtle smile. This was exactly what he'd planned for. The entire mercenary fleet was now locked in a struggle for dominance, each faction believing they were on the verge of claiming the prize. It was chaos, pure and simple, and it was working. "The war has begun," Lucian said quietly, almost to himself, as he leaned over the console to get a better look at the unfolding situation. He could feel the tension shifting in the room, the heavy weight of anticipation thickening the air. As Lucian observed the growing discord among the bounty hunters, his thoughts raced. Each new faction that entered the fray added more confusion, more uncertainty. They had no idea who their real enemy was. All they knew was that they were in a race against one another, and time was slipping away with every passing second. There were mercenaries clashing over the smallest of details, whether to follow their original path, to take another route, or to sabotage their rivals in a last-ditch effort to get ahead. The result? A fractured, disjointed force. "Should we deploy a counterforce to push them back?" Corr asked, his voice edged with impatience. The question hung in the air like a challenge, an acknowledgement that the bounty hunters weren't the only ones with an agenda. Lucian's gaze never wavered from the display as he watched another ship miscalculate and barrel into a decoy asteroid field. He had anticipated this. Earth's forces didn't need to intervene, not yet. Let them fight each other. It's far more effective if we let them burn themselves out. The room fell into a focused silence, save for the occasional beeping of consoles and the murmurs of tactical officers updating data streams. Lucian's fingers hovered over the command panel, sending new false coordinates to the fleets on the move, each one guiding them deeper into an abyss of uncertainty. "We've got trouble, sir," Lieutenant Zoran's voice broke through the stillness, sharper than before. The scorned blade has detected discrepancies in their mission logs. They've begun questioning the intel. They suspect sabotage. Lucian exhaled slowly, his calm demeanor never wavering. Let them question. Let them think they've been outsmarted. Doubt will breed more doubt. And when they find the truth, they'll already be too deep into enemy territory. The Vanguard's exterior view showed the glowing paths of ships veering wildly off course, each trying to align themselves with a target that didn't exist. This was no longer just a battle for resources. It was a war of information. Every faction was unknowingly working against itself, each one becoming its own worst enemy. "Should we consider terminating the false trail?" Varian asked, glancing at Lucian. His voice was steady but laced with the weight of his thoughts. They might be getting too close to finding the core deception. No. Lucian's answer was firm, his gaze unwavering. This is the moment of reckoning. We let them find themselves trapped in a maze they've created. Every minute they waste means less time to target humanity. The tension in the room seemed to crackle as the false data continued to spread like wildfire through the mercenary networks. Ships collided, either through miscommunication or sabotage, while others retracted from their calculated routes. It was no longer just the bounty hunters who were confused. The pirates had begun questioning each other's motives. For every false victory, there were 3 defeats, and it was growing clear that no one would come out unscathed. "Sir," Lieutenant Kor called again, his voice tense, "the pirates are turning on each other. The Black Widow reports a direct hit from a rival faction. They've been ambushed." Lucian's lips quirked upward in a near imperceptible smile. The plan was working even better than he'd hoped. The pirates had become so focused on their own greed that they were blinded by their distrust. In their haste, they had opened themselves up to attack from their supposed allies. The war had shifted from a pursuit of bounty to an internal battle for control. "They've made their own bed," Lucian murmured, his voice low with satisfaction. "Let them lie in it." Varian was quiet for a moment, watching as the incoming messages poured in. Reports of further skirmishes between pirate fleets, bounty hunters accusing each other of sabotage, mercenaries pulling out of the hunt entirely. This was the moment that would determine the success of Lucian's strategy. "Are we ready to move on to Phase 2? Varian asked, his tone grave but eager. Lucian took a deep breath, his mind racing ahead, calculating the next steps. Almost. The more fractured they become, the easier it will be for us to strike when they're at their weakest. Outside the bridge, the hum of the Vanguard's engines echoed in the stillness of space, as if the ship itself was waiting in anticipation. Lucian could feel the weight of the galaxy shifting around him. The first wave of the conflict had already begun, and Earth was playing a dangerous game of chess against forces far larger and more powerful than itself. The next moves would be critical, the calm before the storm was over. Lucian's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. He could already hear the next set of steps in the plan, the subtle shifts, the quieter moments of destruction that would lead to the unraveling of their enemies. But that was for later. For now, the war was only just beginning. "Phase 2 is imminent," Lucian said, his voice steady as ever. "We'll let them fight for a while longer. When they think they've exhausted themselves, we'll hit them where they least expect it." And with that, Lucian Draven stepped away from the command center, his fingers twitching with the anticipation of the next round. The Vanguard glided through the ink-black expanse, the pressure in the command deck rising as the ship's crew anxiously tracked the shifting movements of the mercenary fleets. Lucian Draven stood quietly at the helm, his focus unbroken as the laser plasma displays before him flickered with the chaos unfolding across the galaxy. Pirate factions, bounty hunters, and mercenaries had swallowed the bait. Now they were tangled in a web of their own making. Earth's plan was moving faster than anticipated, and the storm was only beginning. Varian Ordos watched Lucian, the unease in his posture barely concealed behind a mask of calm. "It's happening faster than we predicted," he said, his voice carrying a subtle tremor of disbelief. "They're all turning on each other. They'll start eliminating their own before long." Lucian's gaze never wavered from the glowing maps and shifting data. He didn't need to look at Varian to know what he was thinking. Perfect. The more fractured they are, the less time they'll have to focus on us. The command deck was cold, the air thick with tension. Every officer on the bridge was glued to their station, fingers dancing across touchscreens, eyes darting between new feeds and shifting tactical overlays. The pulse of the ship's systems hummed beneath their feet, steady and unmoving. Yet in the room, the silence was charged with the imminent shift in the battle. Earth's enemies were in the process of consuming themselves, each faction caught in the delusion that victory was within their grasp. They were, in reality, standing on the edge of mutual destruction. Lucian's fingers tapped out a rapid sequence of commands, adjusting the course of the Vanguard ever so slightly. The adjustments were minute, small enough to be unnoticed, but critical in the grand scheme. Every tiny movement had a ripple effect. His eyes flicked to the data flowing across the laser plasma displays, watching as mercenary groups converged on false targets, swallowing the disinformation without question. Some ships had already begun to attack each other, the destruction caused by their greed becoming a vicious cycle of error and betrayal. "The Black Widow has been disabled," Lieutenant Corps called out, his voice sharp with the edge of excitement. "They've been ambushed by their own fleet. The pirates are in disarray." Lucian barely reacted, his gaze steady. "That's just the beginning. The pirates are nothing but a distraction. Wait for the real shift." Varian turned, his brow furrowed as he studied the data. "But the bounty hunters, they're still closing in on Earth's position. The pirates might be scattering, but the mercenaries are still relentless." Lucian's lips curled into a thin smile. "Not for long. As they close in, the web tightens." The data coming in was erratic now. The mercenaries had begun questioning each other's motivations, accusing one another of sabotage and hoarding intel. The more they fought among themselves, the easier it was for Earth's influence to spread. Lucian knew this wasn't a traditional war. It wasn't about firepower or sheer numbers. This was about manipulating the very nature of their enemies, turning their own doubts into weapons. "Send them the new coordinates," Lucian instructed. "Have them lead each other further into the chaos." With a few swift motions, Varian initiated the command, sending more deceptive information out into the galaxy. The mercenaries, now blind to the truth, charged ahead in pursuit of something that didn't exist, each ship straining against the others as they blindly fought for control. Reports from the Gravewalker, Zoran, one of the tactical officers, interrupted the silence. "They're starting to suspect something. They've found a discrepancy in the intel we provided. Their fleet is slowing down to reassess." Lucian's eyes narrowed. There it was, the first crack in their armor. "Good. Let them pause. The longer they hesitate, the more we gain. Once they question themselves, they'll be too tangled up to act." Varian exchanged a glance with Lucian. "What happens when they finally realize it's a trap?" Lucian's lips parted in a brief, calculating smile. "By then, it'll be too late. They'll have wasted too much time fighting amongst themselves. They'll be too weak to mount a real offensive." The weight of the situation was starting to settle in. The bounty hunters, pirates, and mercenaries had become so disoriented by their own actions that they were now incapable of coordinating effectively. Ships continued to break off from the hunt, some returning to their home systems in defeat, others struggling to stay in contact as their ranks thinned. Earth's enemies were faltering, but there was no time to let the situation lull into complacency. "Mercenaries are withdrawing. Several are returning to their employers. Others are cutting losses," Lieutenant Corps continued, his voice tight with the tension of uncertainty. "It's all falling apart, sir." "What now?" Lucian straightened, finally turning his full attention to the laser plasma display in front of him. The fragmented mercenary fleets were withdrawing one by one, their chances of completing their mission all but gone. The feeling of victory was at his fingertips, but he knew this wasn't the end. This was simply the quiet before the true reckoning. "Now we take advantage of their confusion. The Council won't be far behind. Let's send them a message." The words were spoken with a quiet intensity that carried far more weight than they seemed. The Vanguard's engines thrummed beneath them, not with the rush of battle, but with the slow, deliberate pulse of strategy. Every move made was part of something larger, something that had been meticulously planned and executed. Varian watched as Lucian began typing swiftly on the console, his movements sure and methodical. The silence in the room stretched, and Varian felt a cold thrill at the certainty in Lucian's actions. He wasn't just a diplomat. Lucian was a tactician, a master manipulator of both minds and battles. "We'll give them a reason to pause," Lucian muttered to himself. "Let's place our own bounty." The words hung in the air for a moment, and then Varian understood. "You want us to turn the tables? Put a bounty on the council?" Lucian nodded, his eyes gleaming. "A dangerous game, isn't it? Let's see how the council reacts when they find out their own enforcers are being hunted. They've underestimated us for too long." Varian stood still for a beat, then nodded sharply. "Understood. They won't see it coming." A sense of finality washed over the command deck. The plans had come together, but Lucian knew that the next steps would be the most critical. The council was about to feel the weight of their own decisions, and this time Earth's influence would not be dismissed. As the first wave of the mercenary collapse spread across the galaxy, Lucian knew that the true test was still to come. The next moves would be a message to the entire galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. As the Vanguard turned its course, heading toward an uncertain but promising future, Lucian couldn't help but wonder how much longer the Council would stay blind to the shifting tides. Their time was running out. Lucian Draven stood at the command center of the Vanguard, his gaze fixed on the shifting lights of the laser plasma displays. The air in the room felt dense with the anticipation of the coming storm. Every officer on the bridge seemed to feel the weight of the tension, their movements sharp and deliberate as they navigated the rapidly unfolding chaos in the galaxy. The mercenaries were retreating, but the Galactic Council had yet to acknowledge their defeat. Lucian knew the next move had to be decisive. The game had changed, and Earth was no longer just a player. It was a force in motion. He turned to Varian Ordos, who was hunched over his station, rapidly cross-referencing data from various sources. "They're retreating, but they won't give up so easily," Lucian said, his voice cool, betraying no trace of the excitement simmering beneath his calm exterior. "We need to make them think they've lost, while ensuring they don't realize the truth until it's too late." Varian looked up, his face tight with concentration. "We've sent enough misinformation, but their leadership is still intact. The Council won't back down easily." "No," Lucian said, his gaze sharp. "But they will question themselves. The Council thrives on control. When they lose it, when they can no longer trust their own enforcers, it'll be over. The moment they begin to doubt their own authority, their grip on power will slip." The bridge was quiet, except for the steady clicks of officers typing into their consoles and the occasional low murmur of quiet discussions. The atmosphere felt heavier now, like a storm cloud hanging over their heads, promising a deluge of tension and action. Lucian's mind raced with the calculations of the next few steps. Every movement had to be precise, or the entire plan could come crashing down. Lieutenant Kor stepped forward, his expression grim. "Sir, the mercenaries are starting to realize they've been played. Some of them are calling it quits, others are defecting. The pirates are falling apart too." Lucian nodded slowly. This was expected, but the true enemy had yet to show its hand. "Good," he said. "Keep feeding them misinformation. Make sure they never realize how deep the hole goes." Varian turned toward Lucian, his expression hardening with resolve. "And when the Council finally notices? When they realize the bounty is a farce?" Lucian's lips quirked into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "That's when the fun begins." The seconds seemed to stretch into minutes as Lucian reviewed the data in front of him. He could almost feel the galaxy shifting around them, as if everything was poised at the edge of a precipice, waiting for the next move to send it tumbling. The Council, once so confident in its power, was on the brink of unraveling, and Earth was the catalyst. "Update from the Gravewalker," Kor called again. "They've encountered a fleet from the Galactic Council. They're attempting to intercept them, but there's confusion on their end. They don't know who to trust. Some factions are pulling back. Some are still heading for Earth, but they're off course." Lucian didn't flinch. It was all going according to plan. The mercenaries and pirates had been dispatched, scattered, confused. But the real question was what the Council would do now that their own forces were starting to fracture. The enforcers they'd sent to control the chaos were now questioning their orders. Lucian knew that the moment they turned on each other, the Council's authority would collapse. "Don't just watch," Lucian said, his voice a low command. "Prepare the counteroffensive. I want all assets in place. It's time to make our move." Varian's eyes gleamed with the sharpness of someone who knew exactly what was at stake. "What's the next step, then? They'll be closing in soon. The bounty hunters will regroup. We need to do more than just confuse them. We need to hit hard." Lucian smiled, a slow, deliberate gesture. "That's exactly what we'll do. We'll let them close in, make them think they're winning. Then, we'll strike." The room grew even quieter as the officers turned to their stations, the pressure mounting as each part of the plan clicked into place. The laser plasma displays flickered as new data came in, painting the path of the mercenary fleets, some still hell-bent on Earth, others torn between suspicion and greed. Lucian could feel the shift in the air. It was time to act. "Start the countdown," Lucian said, his voice a quiet command that resonated in the stillness. "We'll send a message, one they can't ignore." The seconds ticked down on the heads-up display, each one a beat in the symphony of war they were orchestrating. Lucian's eyes were fixed on the map, watching as the factions began to cluster. They thought they had Earth cornered, but they were walking straight into a trap. "We'll make them fight for it," Lucian murmured to himself, watching the enemy close in. But now, the distance between Earth and the enemy fleets had become their greatest asset. The mercenaries, the pirates, even the Council's forces, they were all within range now. A sharp beep interrupted his thoughts. Kor turned to face him, his expression tense. "The Council's fleets are moving, sir. They've started to fall back, regrouping. They're preparing to strike us directly." Lucian nodded. He had expected this moment, too. "Let them regroup. Let them think they're in control. What they don't know is that their very actions are playing right into our hands." The officers worked quickly, sending out final encrypted messages, laying the groundwork for their final strike. Lucian stood still, his mind racing through the countless scenarios unfolding around him. The Vanguard was now on a collision course with the Council's forces. This would be their final chance to deal a blow they couldn't recover from. Varian stepped up to Lucian's side, his face tense with the gravity of their situation. "Are you sure this is the right moment? If we strike too early—" "No," Lucian interjected, his voice cold with certainty. "Now is the only moment that matters. The Council has already lost. They just don't know it yet." The countdown on the screen reached its final seconds. The tension on the bridge thickened, an electric hum filling the air, as officers tightened their grip on their consoles. Lucian knew the stakes. If Earth didn't hit hard now, the Council would reassert control, regroup, and drag this out for years. The fate of humanity depended on this moment. "Execute," Lucian commanded. In the blink of an eye, the Vanguard released its barrage of misinformation, locking the Council's fleets in a web of confusion. False coordinates, false intelligence. Every move they made was countered with a misstep of their own making. The enforcers, once loyal to the Council, began to doubt their orders. They were left with no choice but to turn against each other. "Phase 1 is complete," Varian said, watching the chaos unfold on the screens. The factions were scattering, their once synchronized movement now shattered. "Now, we wait for the real test." Lucian's gaze was calm, unwavering. "The Council will break soon. They've already made their final mistake." As the Vanguard moved toward its final strike, the first signs of victory began to ripple through the galaxy. The Council's grip on its power was slipping, and there was no turning back now. The silence in the command deck was suffocating as Lucian Draven stared at the laser plasma displays, the colors of the galaxy bleeding across the screen. He had expected chaos, but this, the sight of the fractured Council, the disarray of their fleet, was more than even he had anticipated. Earth's plan was unfolding like clockwork, but now the weight of the moment settled on his shoulders like 1,000 tons of pressure. They had done it. The Council was collapsing. Lucian's strategy had worked. Too well. But the war was not yet over, and victory was no guarantee until Earth's enemies fully acknowledged their defeat. Varian Ordos stood beside him, his face unreadable. It's done. The enforcers are turning on their own leaders. There's no cohesion left in their ranks. Lucian's lips tightened, his gaze unwavering. Number, it's just the beginning. The Council will fight to the end. We can't afford to take anything for granted. The officers at their stations moved quickly, analyzing the retreating fleets on their heads-up displays. The readings showed the mercenaries scattering, most of them abandoning the hunt, their ambition turned to suspicion, their pursuit of bounty replaced by paranoia. The Council's forces, though still formidable, were splintering under the weight of their internal dissent. It was a beautiful sight, a puzzle falling apart piece by piece. They won't last long, Varian said, his voice low with the hint of a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The more they question, the less they trust each other. Even the enforcers know their time is running out. Lucian nodded but kept his attention fixed on the movement of the fleets. He could see them on the laser plasma display, the once proud formations of the Galactic Council, now fractured and retreating in disarray. Some ships turned away from their missions, heading back toward the Council's core territories, unsure whether to return in defeat or attempt another desperate offensive. Others hesitated, refusing to follow orders. The mercenaries' retreat had been swift, but it was the Council's fear that had truly set the stage for the final play. The air around them was charged with the scent of burned ozone from the previous round of misdirected strikes. The quiet buzz of the bridge's equipment filled the tense void, punctuated by the occasional click of data updates. But there was no time to rest. Lucian's mind was racing ahead, his thoughts calculating the next step, anticipating the Council's every move. "Update from the Grave Walker," Lieutenant Corr's voice broke through the thick tension. "The Council's leadership is fractured. They're calling for reinforcements from their core worlds, but it's already too late. Their fleets are already splintering." Lucian's fingers moved over the controls, adjusting the data on the display. His lips barely parted as he spoke. "Send the message. Now they'll have no choice but to surrender." Varian looked at Lucian, his brow furrowed in concern. "If we push them too far, if we move too quickly, we risk making them lash out." Lucian's eyes narrowed, the calculation of 1,000 decisions flashing across his mind. Lashing out is their only option. Let them think they still have power. Let them waste their remaining resources trying to regain control. On the display, the paths of the Council's ships began to warp, their former coordinated movements becoming erratic. Ships once poised to strike Earth were now turning inward, fighting amongst themselves. What was once a formidable military machine now seemed more like a broken-down assembly of misaligned factions. The faces of the commanders aboard the Vanguard were taut, their concentration evident as they tracked the chaos unfolding. Even in this final moment, Lucian's mind never stopped turning, analyzing every detail, every shift in the Council's response. Varian's voice was clipped, but there was an edge to it now, something that hadn't been there earlier. "This is it, then. Earth is poised to dominate. If they don't collapse entirely, if they keep throwing reinforcements at this—" "They will," Lucian interrupted, his eyes locked onto the heads-up display. "Their arrogance is their downfall. They won't realize how far gone they are until we force their hand." There was a brief lull on the bridge, a moment where every officer paused in their duties. Lucian didn't move, didn't even blink. He had won, but the endgame was still in play. The Council was retreating, but they weren't yet beaten. Earth would need to hit them at the heart of their power before the last remnants could regroup. Corr's voice broke the stillness again. "Sir, the Council's message just came through. They're demanding terms, asking for a ceasefire." Lucian didn't look up from the display, but the coldness in his voice was clear. "They're begging now. Too late for terms. We've already won." Varian turned toward Lucian, his expression a mix of admiration and disbelief. "And Earth just sits back now?" Lucian's eyes met his. "Now? We let them come to us. We've already proven we don't need their approval. They'll do the rest." For a brief moment, Lucian allowed himself to breathe, the weight lifting slightly off his chest. But the battle wasn't over. It wasn't even close. The Council's defeat might be inevitable, but the remnants of their power would still struggle to find a way to strike back. Earth needed to take its next steps carefully, make sure this victory was irreversible. "Prepare for final orders," Lucian said, voice low and unwavering. "We can't let them regroup. There's no turning back now." The bridge was alive with activity again. Commands flew from station to station, the officers moving with the quiet intensity that had carried them this far. Varian stepped back from his station, looking over Lucian one final time. "This is what you envisioned, isn't it?" Varian's voice was almost a whisper, reverence in his words. Lucian's gaze was steady. "Not just me. This was always going to be humanity's story. We're just writing the final chapter." The quiet before the storm had arrived. The Vanguard was still poised to make the final move, but the battlefield had shifted irrevocably. The Council's power was crumbling under its own weight, its leaders scattered across the galaxy, unsure where to turn next. Lucian knew that Earth had proven its strength, its ability to outthink and outlast its enemies. The true battle was over, but the war for the galaxy was just beginning. With a final glance at the heads-up display, Lucian turned toward the bridge's exit, his mind already focused on the future. "Let's finish this," he said, the words sharp and deliberate. The galaxy was now Earth's to shape. The Vanguard was quiet. Lucian Draven stood at the helm, staring at the laser plasma displays that flickered with the fragmented signals of the defeated Galactic Council. Their once mighty fleets were now disbanded, their leadership scattered, their enforcers hesitant and disoriented. Earth had not just survived, it had reshaped the balance of power in the galaxy. The Council, once a symbol of unstoppable authority, had collapsed under the weight of their own mistakes, and the galaxy now watched, waiting to see what humanity would do next. Lucian's fingers moved across the console, updating the strategic data for their next move. The tension in the room was palpable, but it wasn't the same tension from before. It wasn't the anxiety of an approaching battle. It was the quiet before the revolution, before the new world order that humanity would soon establish. "Have you been tracking the Council's movements?" Lucian asked, his voice cutting through the silence. He didn't look up as he spoke, his eyes locked onto the rolling data streams. Varian Ordos, standing beside him, leaned over the console. "The Council's remnants are scattering. Some are retreating to their core worlds. Others are trying to form smaller coalitions, but they're fractured. There's no cohesion left." Lucian nodded slowly. He had expected as much. What had once been a formidable empire of unity through fear had unraveled in days, torn apart by their own overconfidence and their underestimation of humanity's resolve. The fall of the Council was inevitable once their enforcers began to doubt the legitimacy of their leadership. "Their power is gone," Varian added quietly. "But there are others out there, other factions that are watching, wondering if we're just as brittle as the Council. There's a sense of hesitation in the air." Lucian smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Let them hesitate. Earth's power isn't just military. It's in our ability to adapt, to move faster than anyone else. We don't need to win battles. We need to win minds. The galaxy will follow strength, and right now, that's what we have." The bridge was still, the hum of machinery almost imperceptible. The lights from the laser plasma displays cast harsh reflections on the faces of the crew, who moved with purpose but held their breath, waiting for Lucian's next orders. The work wasn't over. This was just the beginning of a new era. The Council had crumbled, but there were still countless factions, smaller, more agile, perhaps more dangerous in their desperation. Lucian knew that their victory over the Council didn't guarantee peace. It was only a temporary void, and it would be filled with new challenges, new threats. "We can't let our guard down," Lucian said, turning to face Varian, his tone hardening. "They'll come after us sooner or later. The remaining factions won't simply bow down to Earth because the Council fell. We'll need to show them who we are, what we're capable of." Varian regarded him with a thoughtful look. "So what's our next move?" Lucian leaned back slightly, his fingers steepling in front of him as he began to outline the next phase. We consolidate. We don't need to rush. The Council is already too fractured to act coherently, but we need to set the stage for what comes next. We need to show that humanity is a force for order, not chaos. We will be the ones to lead the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as leaders who offer something different. Varian raised an eyebrow. Offer something different? Like what? Lucian's smile was cold. Like stability, like unity. The galaxy's powers are scattered. They're weak because they don't trust each other. That's where Earth comes in. We offer them what they don't have: trust. We build alliances from the wreckage of the Council's failure. As he spoke, Lucian could see the mental calculations shifting behind Varian's eyes. The director of Earth's covert operations was quick to understand the plan. You want to create a new order, Varian said, the realization dawning on him. One that doesn't rely on fear but on something stronger. Trust. Unity. Humanity. Lucian nodded, his gaze now fixed on the data pouring in from across the galaxy. Exactly. We begin with diplomacy, building connections with the factions that want to move forward, that see the value in unity, but we don't ignore the others. We'll have a military presence, subtle, always in the background, but it will be clear that anyone who tries to challenge our authority will face consequences. Varian's face softened slightly with approval. And the other factions, the ones that are still loyal to the Council? Lucian's smile deepened. We don't negotiate with them. They've already shown their true colors. They've proven they can't be trusted. We'll leave them to fight amongst themselves, just as we did with the Council. A soft ding from one of the consoles broke the conversation, and Kor's voice rang out from across the room. Sir, we've received a communication from the Rift. They've requested a meeting, specifically with Earth's leadership. Lucian turned to face the screen, his eyes narrowing. The Rift was a notorious faction, disorganized, with no centralized leadership but a network of powerful rogue leaders scattered across the galaxy. They thrived on chaos, and Lucian knew they would be a problem. They might not be able to directly challenge Earth, but they could certainly stir up trouble, and that was something Lucian wasn't willing to let slide. Bring it up, Lucian said. The screen flickered, and a voice echoed from the heads-up display. Ambassador Draven, Earth's swift ascension has not gone unnoticed. The Rift recognizes your strength, but understand this. Your unity threatens the old way. You cannot expect the galaxy to follow your example without challenging the very core of what keeps it in balance. The voice was rough, tinged with disdain. The Rift had always been unpredictable, disjointed, but their influence was undeniable. Lucian stood still, his expression hard. The galaxy is shifting. The Council's grip is broken, and we are prepared to take their place, whether you choose to cooperate or not. Prepare for the inevitable, the voice hissed, before the transmission cut. Varian turned to Lucian, the tension thick in his expression. The Rift won't sit idle. They will resist. Lucian's smile returned, but this time there was a hint of satisfaction in it. They'll try, but every faction that challenges us will fall apart in the same way the Council did. We'll give them no choice but to bend the knee, or they'll burn themselves out trying. The Vanguard moved forward, its engines pushing the ship into new territories, as Lucian's mind raced ahead, already calculating the next moves. The Council had fallen, but their absence left a vacuum, and Lucian knew that filling that void would take more than just military might. It would take finesse, strategy, and patience. We are on the precipice of something new, Lucian said, his voice low, almost reverent. This is humanity's time. We'll not only lead the galaxy, we'll reshape it, one alliance at a time. Varian nodded, the spark of understanding lighting his eyes. And the rest of the galaxy will fall in line. Lucian's gaze never wavered from the stars ahead. They have no choice. The Vanguard moved slowly through the silent void, its path clear and unwavering, as Lucian Draven stood at the command center, the weight of the galaxy now pressing down on him. The Council was broken. The remnants of their empire lay scattered, drifting like wreckage in the wake of Earth's ascension. The struggle was over. The galaxy had watched as humanity, against all odds, dismantled an empire that had once seemed invincible. And now, the galaxy waited for the inevitable. The question wasn't if Earth would lead, it was how long until the rest of the galaxy bent the knee. "Status report," Lucian said, his voice cutting through the quiet of the bridge. Varian Ordos, standing beside him, glanced at the screen, his gaze cold and calculating. "The message is spreading. The remaining factions are slowly coming to terms with the shift in power. Some are cooperating, others are digging in their heels, refusing to admit that their time has passed." Lucian's eyes narrowed as he watched the laser plasma displays flash with signals from across the galaxy. Resistance was to be expected. Some factions would always cling to the old ways, but Lucian knew that their resistance wouldn't last. They had no choice but to fall in line. Earth was now the beacon of power, not through brute force, but through the sheer force of will. It wasn't about domination, it was about control of destiny. Humanity had come into its own. "We're not here to take the galaxy," Lucian said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of an undeniable truth. "We're here to shape it." The Council tried to control everything, and look where it got them. They tried to force the galaxy into submission with fear, with power, but they forgot one thing. The galaxy doesn't fear us. They fear what happens when we unite. They fear our resolve, fear our strength, and now they will understand what it means to go against humanity. Varian tilted his head slightly. "So, what's our next step?" Lucian didn't look at him. His eyes remained fixed on the shimmering stars outside, the final frontier that was now Earth's to command. "We show them," he said, his voice dropping to a low, almost dangerous whisper. "We show them that humanity is not a species to be underestimated, not a species to be silenced. We show them that the galaxy has a new order, and that order is not dictated by fear, but by will, by the strength to endure, by the strength to thrive." Varian stood still for a moment, then nodded, a rare flicker of admiration crossing his face. "We're not just here to survive anymore. We're here to lead." Lucian's gaze remained locked on the screen, his mind already several steps ahead. "Exactly. Let them see the world through our eyes, through the eyes of a species that has endured wars, hardships, betrayal, and loss. A species that has never bent the knee. A species that always rises." A soft beep from the tactical station broke the quiet. Lieutenant Kor, who had been observing the ongoing communications with various factions, looked up with a tight expression. "Sir, we've received another transmission from the Rift. They're acknowledging Earth's dominance. They want to negotiate terms for cooperation." Lucian turned toward him, his expression unreadable. He knew the Rift was dangerous, unpredictable. They would never truly bow to Earth, but their respect would come in time. "Send them the terms," Lucian said, his voice firm. "Tell them we'll negotiate, on our terms. We've given them enough room to make their choices, but their choices will come at a price." Varian raised an eyebrow. "And what will that price be?" Lucian's eyes gleamed with cold certainty. "Respect, trust. Any faction that wants to be a part of this new order will follow our lead, or they'll be swept aside. We're not here to negotiate weakness. We're here to build something stronger." The crew members moved with practiced efficiency, sending the message to the Rift, their commands clear and precise. Lucian's words echoed in the silent room. This was not a time for diplomacy out of weakness. It was a time for diplomacy out of strength. Outside, the stars continued to burn, indifferent to the unfolding drama. But Lucian could feel the pull of the galaxy shifting, slowly but surely, toward Earth's will. The remnants of the Council's power were crumbling, and in their wake, Earth would rise, not through the force of armies, but through the power of unity, strength, and an unyielding resolve to lead. As the Vanguard cruised deeper into uncharted space, Lucian's thoughts drifted, not to the battles won, but to the battles yet to come. There would be others, factions that would test their power. The Rift was only the beginning, but Earth was ready. The galaxy had seen humanity's brilliance in the face of impossible odds. They had seen it in their ingenuity, their strategy, their willingness to sacrifice everything for their survival. Lucian turned back toward Varian. We're not just leading this galaxy. We're showing them how it's done, how it should be done. Humanity doesn't need to follow the old ways. We carve our own path. We create our own future. Varian nodded again, his lips pressing into a thin line. A future where humanity is no longer the underdog. Lucian's smile was sharp, full of meaning. A future where humanity is the force that shapes everything in its path. The final message was sent. Earth's dominance was secure. The galaxy would never be the same. The rift might resist, others might test them, but Lucian knew one truth above all else. The galaxy would remember Earth not as a species of survivors, but as a species of builders, creators, leaders. Humanity had proven its worth. And as Earth's new era began, the rest of the galaxy would be forced to follow, or face the consequences of standing in its way. As the Vanguard sailed through the stars, Lucian Draven stood tall, his heart set on the future. "Let them come," he said quietly. "Let them see the power of a species that refuses to bend, refuses to break. Humanity is here to stay." And as the stars stretched out before them, Lucian knew one thing for certain. Humanity's place in the galaxy had been secured, not by the might of weapons, but by the strength of their will, and no one, no force, could ever take that away.